Hey everyone, and welcome to RPG Horror Stories with DnD Doge. I know it's been a while, but I have been dealing with some medical stuff, and won't be uploading quite as often as I used to. But I am still going to make videos as often as I can for now. But with that, in today's episode, we have a tale about a player demanding that a dungeon master allow certain things just because Matt Mercer allows it on Critical Role. A story about a player blaming his friend and Dungeons & Dragons for making him gay, and more. But before we get into that, I know that a lot of you are probably missing the kitties as well. So here they are. They've been such a big help the past few weeks, let me tell you. But with that said, let's get into these stories. Came across my first real issue with the Matt Mercer effect this week, by Reddit user Apocryph761. Probably a tame one by this substandards, but here we go. So I run a lot of D&D. I've even done it professionally as a paid DM, though not anymore. That's a separate post altogether, I think. But whilst I see and read a lot about DMs having issues with players who are introduced to the hobby through Stranger Things or Critical Role, this is the first time I've actually stumbled over the issue myself, and I'm kinda salty about it for two reasons. One, the player in question ground the game to a halt in order to pitch and debate me about running a class feature in a particular way. Two, as a veteran player and DM himself, he really ought to know better. In fairness, I was asking for trouble when I, at this player's request, funnily enough, allowed the Blood Hunter class, a class that Matt Mercer created. My only real defense is that, 1. Curse of Strahd is an appropriate setting for an edgelord class like a Blood Hunter, and 2. The issue is separate to the role of Blood Hunter anyway. Player decides to play a Goblin, a small race. He takes the Order of the Lycan subclass. All fair enough. He has gone for this were-shark transformation that's really cool. I should also explain at this point that while the player will deny this, he is one of those players that absolutely loves to win and will always try and put his character in a position to do so. That's not a problem by any means, but it also means that he really doesn't like it when his character isn't in that position. Anyway, after a player character died the last session, the party starts this session looting the body, and Goblin eyes this heavy crossbow and calls dibs. I see that's fine, but gently remind him that small-sized creatures have disadvantage on using heavy weapons. He tries to argue, "No, I'm sure that's only tiny size." Cue the game being ground to a halt as we double check. And nope, I'm right. Small size or smaller. Sorry. Let's move on. "What about if I transform using hybrid transformation? I can be one size larger, right?" he asks. Nope, there is nothing in Raw about that, and I'm not about to allow it, because if a medium-sized creature played this class, they would become large size when transformed, and that has major mechanical consequences, especially regarding reach, etc. "Well, Matt Mercer says it could be run this way." And yet, curiously, didn't allow it when writing up the class. I'm salty because this was the debate that stopped the game, and then dragged on because the player wouldn't initially accept no as an answer until he felt he'd exhausted all of his excuses. This was also not a discussion that needed to happen there and then, as I'm very happy to discuss reasonings between sessions. But as a PSA to players, if you're trying to butter up your DM into allowing something to be run in a particular way, the worst thing you can say is, "Matt Mercer says you can," or "That's how Matt Mercer does it." Because one thing I was going to allow was for them to be able to breathe underwater in hybrid form, as it makes sense for a were-shark, despite there not being anything in the raw to allow it. But I'm now genuinely worried that will be the proverbial inch that becomes the mile. Like, "Oh, well if you're going to allow that, then reveals long list of demands, including size growth again. So yeah, nothing group breaking or anything like that, though I'm dreading the conversation with him because it's not the first time I've had to address this behavior, including a moment the session before last actually, where he tried to lie about what I'd said earlier in the session. I was grateful to have the other players back me up on that one. They're great in low-stakes D&D games and campaigns, where roleplay rules over mechanics, but more serious games seems to bring out something unpleasant in them. Now that I think about it, maybe that's the conversation I need to have with them. Yeah, it's gotta be annoying when you're a DM and have a player that constantly contests your rulings. But I would imagine that it's even more so when they say that it should be that way just because Matt Mercer allows it. Then to stop the game for everyone else to keep arguing with the DM is pretty selfish. Though I think the DM probably answered his own question at the end of the story there. Talk to the player and express why that bothered you. Remember, communication is key in any game of Dungeons & Dragons. Let's move on. Friend invites me to game, just so he can fantasize about me sexually. By Reddit user, LucidLinks109. So, I wanted to share this story for a while now, because not only did it end up being a bad game, but it ended in my best friend of 20 years, to never speaking to one another again. When I say we were close, I mean we were like brothers. I got into D&D 5th edition a few years ago. About a year or two after that, my then best friend lets me know that a mutual friend is going to be running a Curse of Strahd game and wants to know if I'm interested. I know the DM really well, and I'm excited, so I said sure. When? He then told me in 15 minutes. So I rush online, join the game, and throw together a pretty decent character. A classic half-orc barbarian that likes fine wine and art, just in time for the game. Though my best friend is not there. So I make small talk with the DM since we are friends, and start getting to know the other players. Finally, after an hour, my friend joins the chat, though his character wasn't even ready. By the way, the DM told me that he had given friend 2 weeks notice, and asked him to let me know that we were playing then, so that I could have a character ready too. He had 2 weeks, I had 15 minutes, and I still had a good character ready in time. About an hour later, we help him understand what a wizard class is, because he insisted on wizard despite having no clue what any of the classes do, and we are finally ready to play. The DM does a great job, and we all start to get really into the story, except for my friend. There is an inn you go to early in the module. This can't possibly be a spoiler, right? A group of adventurers go to an inn? And I roleplay my character's interest in fine wine to impress the skeptical locals. It was a great session overall, and we had a lot of fun, even though my friend acted distracted. We then decide to rest for the evening. Here is where things get weird. My friend decides that he doesn't want to sleep alone. He's a frail wizard. He intentionally played a very old half-elf that was at death's door, and is afraid that someone in this dark and creepy inn may try to harm him. Okay, finally getting some great roleplay. I say that he can bunk with me. Lucid will keep him safe. Lucid will even let you be his little spoon. Okay, that was a bit of a vulgar joke on my part, I admit. But his response was that he would like that. At this point, I don't really think it's sexual or anything. Just that he was scared and cold, and was maybe role-playing it in a weird way. Heck, even if he did mean it sexually, I wouldn't have necessarily been opposed to role-playing it, although my character was straight and would have politely turned him down. So I agreed to it. The next session is when things started to really get disturbing though. Let me now provide a piece of relevant background. I am a bisexual male. I have been my entire life. There was never a time in my life where I didn't think good-looking men were, well, good-looking. The same thing applies to good-looking women. I was ashamed of it for a long time, but in my 30s, I started opening up about it to people close to me. People like my wife, my parents, and of course, my closest friends. I had come out to all of these people maybe a year before this game started. Though, back to the game. We leave the inn and begin exploring. I'm being light on details to avoid spoilers, though what is relevant is this. My friend, who was late to the session again, by the way, is constantly distracted, sometimes making odd breathing noises. The DM sometimes has to repeat himself like 2 or 3 times before my friend responds. At one point, he trips and falls at the beginning of combat. I agree to carry him, and he casts spells against monsters while wrapped around my neck. We all think it's weird, but we roll with it. After a few sessions where he was late, he stops showing up, and the DM gets frustrated and cancels the game. Here's where it went from being weird to, honestly, emotionally devastating, for me at least. Friend and I have always played games together, but now do so rarely, and he is very distracted when we do. I ask what's wrong, but he doesn't tell me. Finally, he breaks down and speaks to me in very vulgar terms and how I make him feel sexually. He blames me for telling him I was bi, because that made him realize that he wanted to have sex with me. He tells me that all the times he got quiet or was late before was because he was fantasizing about me. He told me that just hearing my voice made him want to look at porn and or masturbate, which he was doing every time he heard me speak. He then told me that it was my fault and that he never wanted to speak to me again because I had manipulated him or something. Look, I'm glad that toxic jerk is out of my life. It still hurts though. We had helped each other through some really tough times, and for him to start sexualizing me just because he found out that I was bisexual, and then to blame me for his hang-ups and ghost me when I didn't reciprocate, it still hurts a lot. I hope this makes sense. I just wanted to share this sad story, as it put me in a dark place. But I came around. I am an active player and a DM now, and have a lot of fun playing with super cool people. Jesus, that is both disturbing and sad at the same time. It sounds like OP's friend was probably dealing with some internal issues, and the fact that he saw his friend come out may have made him realize that, but to then take it to the levels that he did, and then in turn blame OP for it is both disturbing and outlandish. Like, how the hell did OP lead him on? Because they roleplayed some innocuous thing in Dungeons & Dragons? Because, by the sounds of it, he was already dealing with those things before the first session. I mean, it is really sad that OP lost a friend of that many years, but at the same time, I don't think that there would be any coming back from that. At least it sounds like there's a bit of a silver lining in the fact that OP found some new friends in the tabletop RPG space. But still, damn. I think we definitely need a kitty palate cleanser after that one. There, that is a bit better. Now let's get on to the next one. You guys weren't being heroic enough, so I killed you all. By Reddit user, Researcher Fearless. This is a bit of an old story, so I don't remember the details perfectly. We were a small group of ragtag adventurers. We had a wood elf sorcerer, banished from her village for lighting the forest on fire, played by me. A stoic dragonborn warrior, seeking to avenge his family, played by my cousin. And a mischievous rogue, played by the DM's brother. The king calls us in, because level 1 adventurers are definitely important enough to attract a king's attention, and we are instructed to grab a treasure from an abandoned keep, a few days' journey from the capital. Sure, nothing too big of a deal about this. So we go over to the keep, have a couple minor combats against goblins living there, and grab some loot. Though we never found the treasure that the king asked us to retrieve, but we weren't too worried about it. We get to the dungeon in the basement, and find a random old lady there. She was clearly out of it, since she was practically offering to bake us cookies, despite being locked in a dungeon. So we were all pretty weirded out. Personally, I was like 70% sure that she was a shapeshifter or something, since that's the kind of thing that this DM would do to us. In the end, we decide to take the old lady back with us to the capital, when about 100 goblins appear out of nowhere and rush us. The DM actually said, like 100. Considering how much trouble 5 of them gave us, we ran for our lives, leaving the crazy old lady behind. When we get back to the capital, the king wants to see us. We explained that we didn't get his treasure, but apparently he's not mad about that. He's mad because the random old lady was his mother, and he orders his guard to execute us. Each of these guards are like 5th level, so we get pummeled and hanged. We ask the DM why he put us in that situation, to which he responds, "You guys weren't being heroic enough, so I killed you all. Real heroes would have saved the old lady, regardless of the risk to themselves." Never mind the fact that the king clearly knew his mother was there ahead of time, considering that he knew that she died before we got back, and decided to send 3 random dudes rather than his 5th level guards in full plate. Never mind the fact that we were never sent on any kind of rescue mission, only one of us was even of good alignment, and the DM gave no expectation of heroic action in Session 0. Never mind that the old lady was suspicious as hell, and that the DM deliberately dropped an impossible combat on our heads to force us to run away. Never mind that this DM, as a player, always plays chaotic evil pranksters that mess with and steal from other party members. But nope, none of that matters. Because since the protagonists of his game didn't abandon their own lives on a chance to save some random old lady, we don't deserve to live. P.S. I don't play with him anymore. There was a case where I was running a campaign without him, deliberately I might add, and he went out of his way to find out when and where it was, and showed up during the session and just demanded to be able to play. Fortunately, I've moved since then, and haven't had to interact with him since. But I'm the forever DM now, which is both a blessing and a curse. Well, I guess the true treasure that the king wanted was the crazy old lady they found along the way. Though, seriously, that is some straight up BS. Oh, here's an impossible situation for your characters, who aren't necessarily good aligned, and probably out for themselves. Better make sure they sacrifice themselves for some crazy old lady they just met, or it's an auto TPK when you get back. Though, if the players had stayed, it sounded like that would have ended up in a TPK regardless. You know what? I bet you that the DM wanted the players to fight and get overwhelmed. That way he could introduce his ultra-powered and super cool DMPC. But when they didn't do that, he probably just got angry and decided to just TPK them instead. Thankfully, it sounds like OP never has to deal with this dude ever again, especially with the way that he showed up unannounced and demanded to be able to play an OP's game. That had to be awkward. But that is all I have for you today. As always, I appreciate all of you, and may your games remain horror story free. Until next time.